amb una nova edició, un nou any de la nostra International Week de la Facultat d'Educació, Psicologia i Treball Social, la corresponent a l'any 2025. Jo em dic David Aguilar, soc el degà de la facultat i m'acompanya en aquesta breu estona de benvinguda la vicedegana de Relacions Internacionals, Sílvia Cavalcante. Hola, Sílvia. I abans de començar, sí que m'agradaria donar un agraïment molt especial a totes aquelles persones que han fet possible un any més que aquesta jornada tingui lloc. En primer lloc, evidentment, a la vicedegana i a tot el professorat de la facultat que s'ha implicat, que ha col·laborat, que ha ajudat moltíssim perquè aquesta nova edició tingui lloc, als organismes, unitats i vicerectorats de la universitat que també han participat i ens han ajudat, el vicerectorat de Cultura i Extensió Universitària, el vicerectorat d'Ordenació Acadèmica, el vicerectorat d'Internacionalització, l'Oficina de Relacions Internacionals també. Moltíssimes gràcies a totes i tots i evidentment també al Consell d'Estudiantat de la Facultat d'Educació, Psicologia i Treball Social per la vostra implicació un any més. Bé, un plaer, com us deia, donar-vos la benvinguda en aquesta jornada, en aquesta nova edició. Podríem dir una International Week pràcticament versió 2.0, una revisió, una reinvenció d'una jornada que va començar ja pràcticament fa 10 anys. De fet, la Montse Casanova, en aquell moment vicedegana de Relacions Internacionals, va ser la persona que va promoure aquesta iniciativa nova a la facultat per continuar promovent, per incentivar tot el que és les accions, les activitats d'internacionalització a la facultat. Sempre dic que la nostra facultat és una facultat que lluitem, que ens motivem per obrir-la de portes en fora, que estigui oberta al món. No només al nostre territori, no només a la nostra província, a Lleida, a Catalunya, sinó més enllà. Una facultat que estigui connectada, que dialogui, que parli amb tot el món. I en aquest sentit, fer una mirada més enllà del nostre territori, fer una mirada internacional, és absolutament necessari. Sortir del nostre entorn més teòric, més intern i poder-lo combinar amb aquesta mirada oberta, cultural, social, econòmica, que ens aporten altres cultures, altres països, per poder construir-nos, per poder preparar els professionals d'aquesta facultat. Una facultat en la qual formem, ja sabeu, a mestres, a psicòlegs, a psicòlogues, a educadores, educadors, treballadores i treballadors socials. Una facultat que prepara a totes aquelles persones que estan al costat de les persones i, per tant, que necessitem mirades obertes, mirades diverses, mirades preparades per poder afrontar aquesta realitat social, aquestes professions a les quals vosaltres us dedicareu. I en aquest sentit la facultat té també un conjunt d'objectius per a promoure la internacionalització, un conjunt de propostes, un conjunt d'estratègies per poder liderar aquesta internacionalització dins del nostre centre. Evidentment, el primer que ens interessa és que us animeu a sortir, us animeu a conèixer altres facultats, altres universitats, altres països, i en aquest sentit la facultat intenta incentivar aquesta mobilitat de l'estudiantat. De fet, és una mobilitat que va incrementant-se any rere any. Actualment són més de 100 alumnes els que decidiu cada any sortir a fer un programa de mobilitat, un programa Erasmus, per poder fer part del vostre grau, dels vostres estudis fora de la nostra facultat. I en aquesta línia tenim també altres accions per continuar promovent aquesta mirada més internacional. Per exemple, estem també treballant en la línia de noves titulacions o noves dobles titulacions internacionals en alguns dels països que us anirem també donant a conèixer en el moment que tot això estigui més avançat. Continuem també treballant amb els Blended Programs, continuem també treballant amb alguna modalitat nova que també en algun cas podeu conèixer, els Collaborative Online Interactive Learning Environments, els COIs, que també, de fet, en aquests dies tenim alguna petita oportunitat per conèixer millor què es tracta aquesta iniciativa. I després tenim activitats com la d'avui, jornades que ens permeten intercanviar coneixement amb persones que venen de fora, amb persones i professionals que vindran d'altres països, les universitats, a aportar-nos coneixement nou, jornades per poder intercanviar, dialogar, per poder conèixer també experiències d'internacionalització i a més aquest any una jornada també per tenir alguna nota cultural amb alguns dels tallers que en principi demà teniu preparats, un taller de capoeira, un taller també de música i de percussió, que també agraïm moltíssim a les àrees implicades a l'àrea de música per poder també preparar aquesta activitat. I res, a continuació dono la paraula a la vostra vicedegana de Relacions Internacionals i gràcies a totes i tots per la vostra participació.
Bon dia, Good morning. They told me to speak in English, especially for our guests. So welcome you all to this International Week. We are very happy to start these days. No? We hope to have some days that can be very inspiring for you. And we are very grateful to our guests, our international guests. We think that it's a great opportunity for you all to read, to enjoy the diversity and know about new cultures, new contexts in education. So we also invite you to take part in the other sessions that we are going to have ahead. So welcome and enjoy. Now I would like to invite Professor Nuria Levot to introduce our guest, Marco Catarci.
Bon dia a tots i a totes. Doncs ara, com a referència al nostre ponent i també als alumnes que esteu aquí, que veniu de d'altres universitats d'Itàlia, Milano, Pàdova, Roma, Florència, etc., que avui ens acompanyeu, farem la presentació del ponent, el doctor Marco Catarci, la farem en italià. Em perdonareu l'accent, però ho intentarem. È un vero piacere dare il benvenuto al professor Marco Catarci, una figura di riferimento nell'ambito della pedagogia generale e sociale presso l'Università Roma III. La sua traiettoria accademica e professionale è segnata da un forte impegno per l'inclusione, la interculturalità e l'accoglienza delle persone migranti e rifugiati, congiungendo una solida esperienza di ricerca con una profonda sensibilità umana. Attualmente il protettore dell'Università Roma III, dove coordina la relazione con l'esclusione scolastica, l'organizzazione del terzo settore e gli enti pubblici e privati. Oltre di dirigere il Master in accoglienza e inclusione del richiedente asilo e rifugiati, autore di oltre 115 pubblicazioni tra libri e articoli, il suo lavoro riflette uno sguardo critico e innovativo, sempre orientativo e costruire un'educazione più giusta e più inclusiva. Oggi abbiamo l'opportunità di ascoltare un accademico e pedagogo che, oltre al suo grande valore scientifico, si distingue per l'impegno etico e sociale e per la capacità di costruire ponti tra l'università e la società. Il professor Marco Catarci terrà la conferenza intitolata Prospettiva interculturale nell'istruzione, che ci auguriamo possa ispirare e offrire nuove chiavi di riflessione e di azione nell'ambito educativo e sociale. Grazie mille, Marco.
¿Cómo le pregunta a Italia?
Buenos días. Quiero expresar mi más sincero agradecimiento a la Universidad de Lleida por la invitación a participar en esta conferencia. Es un honor para mí y quiero que es un evento de gran relevancia científica y valor académico. Saludo las autoridades académicas presentes, el decano de la facultad, David Aguilar, la vicedecana Silvia Cavalcante y la profesora Nuria Levot. Y saludo con especial afecto los estudiantes cuya presencia me honra. Pido disculpas por mi pésimo español, no lo hablo, me encanta el español y hablaré en inglés. So my speech will be held in English with a strong Italian accent, but anyway in English. And in my speech I would like to propose a reflection on the role of intercultural education as a transformative tool for building a more just society. So my presentation will be divided into three parts. First of all, I will present some theoretical considerations on the role of education in the context of the multicultural transformation of the society, and in particular of local communities. Secondly, I will provide an overview of what intercultural education is, its aims, and also its recipients. And finally, I will make some concluding remarks on the meaning of an intercultural commitment in the current society. And I will also refer to three practices I've encountered in my work, which I hope will be of interest. I will use three short videos translated in Spanish language. And I also trust that this opportunity will be also a fruitful chance for the academic cooperation between our university. So, I will start from highlighting that we know that widespread processes in society lead people to adopt negative values and behavior of cultural closure in the form of what has been defined natural lifelong learning in action. This notion, natural lifelong learning in action, was proposed by the Italian scholar Francesco Filippo Maria De Santis to explain that the social context of life and work educate us. For example, the environments in which we live, the people we interact with, they educate us in the sense that they lead us to adopt values and behaviors. So to give an example, living in a socially and culturally disadvantaged area, lacking in services, social or cultural opportunities, can educate its inhabitants to social competition, to seek strategies for social survival, to blame difficulties experienced on a weaker social group. And among the many learning opportunities in the society, there are some that occur in natural forms, in ways of which the subjects may be less or more aware, depending on the critical tools at their disposal. But I would like to highlight that regardless the greater or less awareness that subjects may have, these processes do have an educational impact. They have an educational value. So it's essential to ask what these events teach. This is absolutely necessary in the current society because we must consider the fact that these educational processes are very often not subject to any social control. So they take the form of what has been called an hidden curriculum. The educating actors at the origin of the natural lifelong learning in actions are many. Traditional and digital media, living and working conditions, symbolic spaces, the relationships structured within the economic systems, they are all forms of learning and in some cases, as Noam Chomsky says, forms of miseducation. An example of this, we know that throughout Europe, migration is represented by alarming terms. Words such as migratory pressures, waves, tides are used, and emphasis is always placed in this narration on images of landings, while the issue of migration is continually represented from the angle of security. So this xenophobic and very often racist narrative becomes part of the mainstream narration. The governments of many countries, and among them Italy, my country, have launched campaigns to make clear that above all migrants are not welcome in their territories. And migration policies focused on the border control have created what has been called a fortress Europe. It strikes me that 36 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, today new walls exist in Europe, this time to prevent the arrival of migrants. And I want also to remind you that in this moment my country, Italy, has built identification centers in Albania. And many NGOs, among them Amnesty International, have expressed strong concern about this form of detention. So while knowledge and skills are usually attributed to individuals, to subjects, I would like to highlight that this concept have also a collective sense, a collective perspectives. Considering them as a characteristic not only of individuals, but also of local communities. A local community becomes competent when it's able to analyze its own situation, to recognize its own needs, and also use the resources necessary to meet those needs. For a community to be defined as competent, at least three elements, three aspects are necessary. Knowledge first of all of its own problems, but also its resources. And then power, which is the ability to make choices, to influence decisions on the community. And finally, motivation, which translates into the active participation of individuals in addressing collective problems. So in a competent community, knowledge is therefore essential for building prospects for social change and also performing fundamental social functions, such as conflict mediation, building of critical consensus, negotiation. And I would like to give an example of what in Italy build a competent community. In the field of reception for asylum seekers and refugees. In Italy, the system of services for refugees is complex and highly fragmented, reflecting the different policies and the choices of the several governments. But two different models have essentially been compared through the years. On one hand, large collective structures, characterized by emergency management, high concentration of asylum seekers in the same structures and in the same place, in the same town. And that's what has been called extraordinary reception centers. On the other hand, we have also widespread and decentralized reception programs, which involve small groups of asylum seekers within the same territory, promoting closing relationship and greater inclusion with the local community, and that's what we call reception and integration system. I believe that this second model, a network that provides accommodation services, essentially flats in small towns, legal and health assistance, linguistic and cultural mediation, could be a good practice. So these reception practices are inspired by the idea of emancipation, aimed at the autonomy of people, autonomy also from the condition of need, providing the individual with real opportunity to interact with others, to build relationships with other individuals. This approach translates into the creation of contexts, of spaces in which subjects can take some key steps of the complex process of acquiring the form of an active citizenship, and among them the access to social services, the exercise of rights, and among them health and education, the inclusion into the work and housing market. The result is a perspective aimed at making it possible for each individual to define and realize their own projects, regaining also the capacity of choice, developing a perception of their own value in the new context of inclusion. But I would like to highlight that these services for migrants are mainly intercultural services. Working with newcomers and citizens together, they build competent communities. And I would like to show a short video about this experience. We are in the northeast part of Italy, near Turin, in Piemonte, in a really small town.
Cesanuova, un pueblo de montaña a unos 700 metros de altitud, situado en el Canavese, en la provincia de Turín, en la ladera sur del monte Vinsaina. 235 habitantes, en su mayoría personas mayores, con algunas familias algo más jóvenes.
Todo comenzó en 2001. En nuestro pueblo la acogida es una realidad que existe desde hace muchos años y somos de los primeros municipios que se unieron al programa de asilo llamado después SPRAR y luego SAI. Desde 2006 acogemos familias, muchas de las cuales se han quedado en nuestra comunidad e integrado en nuestro pueblo. No puedo más que sentirme orgulloso de ser el alcalde de esta realidad que ya lleva 20 años.
Me encuentro en la oficina de nuestro proyecto SAI. Después de todos estos años, la persona extranjera aquí en Cesanuova ya no es una excepción. Por nuestro proyecto han pasado 60 familias, para un total de unas 400 personas de todas partes del mundo. Para algunos fue un momento de paso en su viaje. Para muchos fue el lugar donde detenerse, respirar y comenzar una nueva vida. El proyecto está estructurado en una acogida distribuida. Las casas están en el pueblo, junto a las de los ciudadanos de Cesanuova, y esto permite un proceso de conocimiento mutuo muy profundo y acelerado. El proyecto está orientado a la autonomía de los beneficiarios. Las personas, acogidas desde siempre, son protagonistas activas de su propio proceso de acogida e inclusión social. Se realizan múltiples actividades dentro del proyecto. Además de los cursos de italiano, hay varios talleres de teatro, música, cocina y deporte. Cada huésped aporta consigo experiencias de vida, cultura, trabajo y estudio que deben ser valoradas para que sean un recurso o una oportunidad para ellos y una riqueza para el país que los acoge. Las familias que se han quedado en el territorio y sobre todo los muchos niños han traído nueva vida al pueblo de Cesanuova.
So, the transformation taking place in these local communities is also the result of identity building dynamics. It's well known that cultural identity cannot be understood as a fixed and immutable characteristic of the subjects, but as a complex and especially changing dimension. On the one hand, it is the result of the interaction of multiple social, historical, and personal factors, and on the other, of the relationship with the social context and with the subjects with whom one interacts. So identity is not given at birth. It's the product of cultural exchange, recombination of social practices, mediation, and also negotiation. Cultural traditions are not separate and immutable entities, are interacting systems that change over the time. So identity is always the result of this continuous negotiation. For this reason, I strongly believe that everyone should have the right to define themselves autonomously, without labels, without imposed labels. Now I would like to speak a little bit about what is an intercultural approach in education. I'm sure I'll offer a non-exhaustive definition, but I would say that interculturalism is an intentional political plan to be implemented through education for the promotion of dialogue, cultural exchange between all, not both natives and foreigners. So in this way, cultural, gender, class, biographical differences becomes points of view enhanced by education. So an intercultural approach presupposes a plan. First of all, a plan, as it requires an active investment in a society aimed at establishing relationships. So, on the basis of an interactionist option. Intercultural education holds a fundamental connection with the social justice, that is to say, it addresses the conditions of disadvantage in establishing those relationships. And then political, I've used this term as it's aimed at the future, connected to an idea of society to be built. So speaking of an intercultural approach means always also community planning community projects. It's not possible to tackle the subject of intercultural relations if first we don't ask ourselves a fundamental question about what kind of society we intend to build. This is unavoidable because in a sort of mirror effect, the foreigner reflects also a version of the society in which he or she is immersed, highlighting its weaknesses, its problems. And Abdelmalek Sayad recalls it, saying that the migrants are a redundant presence because they bring into question how the society is made. I would like to give an example of this. We are speaking today about the refugee crisis in Europe and in Spain. But this crisis is certainly not only determined by the number of arrivals, which remain far lower, for example, in comparison to the southern hemisphere of the world, but I believe it's a crisis on the idea of society and of Europe we intend to build, and in particular the loss of the idea of Europe as a cradle of human rights. And finally, intentional. It's an intentional approach because it's the fruit of choices, the outcome of research, planning, reflection, not coincidence. So, intercultural approach is mainly a commitment to be implemented consciously in formal educational spaces, school, university, but also non-formal ones like association, local communities, and so on. I strongly believe that to analyze the problem of intercultural relations, we need to take a broad and long-term look at this issue. Broad because it's necessary to go behind the local national context, realizing that migration is a phenomenon on a global scale, and long-term, as the historian Fernand Braudel would say, because migrations beyond the contingent events have always been part of the history of humanity. So from this point of view, we can also affirm that education is in itself intercultural. We can also omit the adjective intercultural in this presentation. In other words, education is either intercultural or it's not authentic education at all. What are the goals of this approach? So to answer this question, I would like to note that discourses on intercultural education often refer to difficult realities, to problems of violation of human rights, to experiences of marginalization, violence. So the issue of a possible intercultural approach basically translates into the problem of protecting the dignity of human beings. Without any rhetoric, we must recognize that a migrant is such in a society essentially because he is poor, because he lives at disadvantage in terms of social, economical, and political opportunities. Eisenberger states that foreigners are more foreign the poorer they are, and it's true. It's the condition of socio-economic inconvenience connected to migration that produces a disadvantage. A migrant is vulnerable not because of his migration, but becomes one when he comes into contact with a context which makes him socially weak. And it's interesting to note how often the problems inherent in social inequalities are relegated to the sphere of ethnic or cultural differences, which tends to conceal also the political choices we make, speaking about migration. So the purpose of an intercultural approach is therefore exactly affecting the educational, cultural, social, economic and political context which make people vulnerable. And so rethink how our society is made. Peggy McIntosh clarifies this point. She's an American feminist scholar, and she explained us what is the systemic racism, which acts fundamental as a form of discrimination, not rooted so much in acts of actions of individuals, but mainly in processes of this and how the society functions. And she said, I was taught to recognize racism only in individual acts of meanness by members of my group, but never in invisible systems conferring racial dominance on my group from birth. So, Peggy McIntosh asks us to question these invisible systems, and in identifying the recipients of an intercultural approach, I would say that a rather superficial interpretation could lead us to believe that this approach is aimed only at migrants. An intercultural approach is not a pedagogy for foreigners. It's not only for foreigners. It's a broader approach which involves all, natives and foreigners. Since this is a perspective aimed at tackling the problem of intercultural relations, it would be risky to formulate a one-way request for change, with the questions addressed only to minorities, and without also the majority being asked to question themselves. So we need, once again, to adopt an interactionist perspective, focusing on a strategy to build interaction. I must remind you that the intercultural relations are configured in the work and life spaces as a relationship between a majority and minority. And from this, as Antonio Gramsci explained us, we know that we have a structurally asymmetric relationship, as power is not equally distributed between these two sides. So, I would like to show you a short video shot by a primary school teacher in a multicultural neighborhood in the city of Rome. We are in the Esquilino district near Termini station, where also my department is located. And this school was characterized by the phenomenon of the Italian state. The Italian parents no longer enrolled their children in this school. Over the time, the school has started offering many other and further services, like afternoon play activities, support activities for study, teacher training activities, parents, cultural opportunities for parents. And then today, the Italian parents are coming back to register their children again in this school. So it's an example of how raising the quality of educational, cultural and social services for the most fragile segment of the population ensures also an increase in the quality of those services for the entire population. And here is what the children say about their school.
Buen día. Estas chicas han venido a hacerte algunas preguntas para un proyecto de investigación que están realizando en su clase. Entonces, ¿cuántos estudiantes sois? 21. No, 22. Muy bien, chicos. ¿Cuántos niños de China? 3. ¿Cuántos de Senegal? 2. ¿Cuántos de Filipinas? ¿Y cuántos de Bangladesh? Ah. ¿Cuántos de Colombia? ¿Y cuántos de Rumania? ¿Cuántos italianos en total?
Italians. But I believe that a strong emphasis must be implemented first of all towards the majority to urge them to critically question their identity, which is often used as a weapon to exclude others. An example of this critical interrogation can be made in reference to the Italian context, but I'm sure that a similar analysis could be developed with reference to any other national case. Today, Italy is without doubt a multicultural society. We have 5 million immigrants, they're 9% of the overall population. We have 920,000 students with non-Italian citizenship enrolled in the Italian school system, again 9% of the overall school population. But Italy is not a multicultural country as a consequence of the current phenomenon of immigration. An intercultural perspective has always been part of the history of the country. And this is highlighted by 3 examples. First of all, an historical presence of linguistic and cultural minorities. We have 12 minority linguistic groups corresponding to 2.5 million speakers whose mother tongue is a language different other than the Italian language. They speak Albanian, Slovenian, Croatian, German. Secondly, the story of the emigration of the Italians to other countries of the world, which represents an extraordinary event in the Italian history. It's estimated that between 1876 and 1988, 27 million Italians emigrated, 27 millions. First to North Europe, then North America, South America, and Australia. And the conditions of the migrant experience of the Italians were really harsh, with circumstances and events of violence, discrimination, marginality. And nor we can say that this is an event to be relegated to our past, because today we have 5 million Italians working and living abroad. And finally, from the mid-50s and throughout the 60s, the phenomenon of the internal migration from the south to the north part of Italy, which led to an impressive shift of people, 9 million Italians. So in this scenario, the attempt to represent Italy or any other, I believe any other national case as a culturally homogeneous context cannot be defined in any other terms like totally misleading. It's a form of miseducation in the general debate of migration. But what is striking about these mass experiences, 2.5 million Italians belonging to linguistic minorities, 27 million immigrants, 9 million internal migrants, what is striking is the fact that today they appear forgotten by the Italian population. They don't appear in the public debate on migration. We don't study the Italian immigration in the school system, and so they appear completely irrelevant to the practice adopted in Italy towards migrants. So I believe that an intercultural approach represents an opportunity, first of all, to become aware of the intercultural dimension of our history and of our daily lives. Ralph Clinton highlighted this point, describing in a text the day of the average American citizen, who defined himself as 100% American. So here are some passages of his text. He says that our solid American citizen awakens in a bed built on a pattern which originated in the Near East, but which was modified in Northern Europe before it was transmitted to America. He throws back his covers made of cotton, domesticated in India, linen, domesticated in Near East, or silk, discovered in China. All of these materials have been spun and woven by processes invented in the Near East. So skipping a few passages, on his way to breakfast he stops to buy a paper, paying for it with coins. And at the restaurant, a good new series of borrowed elements confronts him. His plate is made from a type of pottery invented in China. His knife is of steel, an alloy made in southern India. His fork is a medieval Italian invention. While smoking, he reads the news of the day, printed in characters invented by ancient Semites on material invented in China by a process invented in Germany. As he absorbs the accounts of the foreign troubles, he will, if he is a good conservative citizen, thank an every deity in an Indo-European language that he is 100% American. So one wonders how aware of this already intercultural dimension are today those who defend their presumed homogeneous national identity, for example, in the political debate on migration. So to end my presentation, I would like to make 3 brief concluding remarks. First of all, people's stories are battlefield. The intercultural research brings out stories of migrants that have the merit of showing us how our society is made, and in particular highlight the limits of our society in protecting the most vulnerable. My second reflection is that intercultural education is not politically neutral. Here I would like to come back to the thoughts of Paulo Freire, who explained us that education cannot be politically neutral. Education that does not take a position, that does not take part in the oppressor-oppressor dialectic, would favor the dominant power. And neither can intercultural education be politically neutral. And my third reflection is on the meaning taken on by the intercultural approach. From this perspective, dealing with an intercultural approach in education does not mean adding something to education, but rereading education. Rereading education as a tool for thinking and thinking a society. And so, an intercultural approach is mainly a critical and transformative toolbox. To put it once again with the word of Paulo Freire, we know that education does not change the world. education changes people. People, however, change the world. So the images taken in these slides were all shot in an educational experience called Migrant School Network. It's a network of popular schools, mainly associations, active in Roma and Lazio region, that provide free Italian language courses. Minors and adults, and I strongly believe that this is a good intercultural practice. I love this image. This is a mural located outside one of these popular schools. And on one side, we are again near Termini Station in Via Giolitti, Esquilino district. And on one side, a migrant woman with a proud, but I would also say questioning gaze. And on the other, Dante Alighieri, which is the symbol of the Italian culture. Their figures face each other. Their mutual gaze shows us that it's not enough to welcome. It's necessary also to recognize each other. So I would like to show you a short video about the Migrant School Network, just 2 minutes. Maybe it doesn't start. Can you start from the slide? Facciamo partire dalla slide. Se muovi c'è il mouse. Ok, mettila.
Escuelas migrantes. Escuelas migrantes es una realidad plural, una red de más de 100 asociaciones sin fines de lucro que enseñan el idioma italiano a migrantes de primera y segunda generación. Cada asociación es libre de elegir cómo y dónde actuar, pero comparte con el resto de la red el principio de la gratuidad y un enfoque formativo que pone en primer plano a la persona migrante, para acompañarla en su integración en la sociedad. El aprendizaje del idioma se enriquece con actividades deportivas, cineforums, talleres de expresión, teatro, torneos de ajedrez y mucho más. Las escuelas ponen en contacto a los alumnos con servicios legales, consultorios médicos, oficinas de orientación y centros de formación profesional. Una vez al mes, el Quirinal abre sus puertas a los estudiantes para admirar las bellezas del palacio, visitar la residencia del presidente de la República y conocer y apreciar los principios de la Constitución italiana. El resultado de todas estas iniciativas es lo que nosotros llamamos lengua de ciudadanía. ¿Buscas un curso gratuito? ¿Estás buscando un curso gratuito de italiano? Naga Librán, curso de italiano. Con más de 150 sedes, estamos presentes en todas las provincias del Lazio. En el mapa es fácil encontrar la dirección y los horarios de las clases de la escuela que se adapta a tus necesidades. En el mapa también se indican en azul las 35 sedes de educación pública para adultos. Cada año, 12.000 migrantes adultos se inscriben en nuestros cursos. Escuela Migrante también se ocupa de la educación lingüística de las segundas generaciones. Ofrecemos talleres de italiano dentro y fuera de las escuelas, enseñando el idioma de estudio necesario para comprender textos y materias escolares. La red acompaña la inscripción escolar de los alumnos recién llegados a Italia, ofreciendo servicios de mediación lingüística para el diálogo entre padres y profesores y realizando cursos de idioma para las madres de los estudiantes. Para el menor extranjero no acompañado se requiere un compromiso intensivo para ayudarle a comprender la realidad en la que se encuentra y aprovechar su potencial, con el objetivo de acompañarlo hasta la edad adulta y hacerlo autónomo. El nuestro es un voluntariado experimentado, una comunidad de docentes que disfruta compartiendo métodos y experimentaciones y que se actualiza constantemente a través de los cursos organizados por la red.
So to end my presentation, I would like to use a last image to to highlight that interculturalism is an horizon. And Eduardo Galeano described in Utopia that guides this commitment. He says that utopia is on the horizon. I take 2 steps towards it and it moves 2 steps away. I walk down 10 steps and the horizon moves 10 steps further away. No matter how far I walk, I will never reach it. What is utopia for? It's for this very purpose, to walk. So thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias, doctor Marco Catarci. Sobre todo desde la organización agradecerle que se haya ceñido al tiempo que tenía estipulado y que nos ha hecho una reflexión sobre cómo está Italia en 3 aspectos clave, además cómo está el sistema de acogida, así como los 3 vídeos que hemos visto. El vídeo primero que no conocía de la experiencia de Turín, pero sí que doy fe con mis estancias con ustedes, que tanto la escuela de Donato como la escuela de migrante funcionan muy bien y son unas buenas prácticas y pueden ser, a lo mejor el día de mañana, un lugar para ustedes para poder hacer prácticas. También me ha gustado mucho, y le digo gracias de cuore, como dicen los italianos, que haya terminado con las palabras sabias de Eduardo Galeano, escritor, como conocen, y pensador uruguayo, que es uno de sus libros más emblemáticos, que es Palabras Hablantes. Habla de estas palabras vivas, de corazón, que no se mueren, que están en nuestra memoria y que sirven para cambiar la historia. Él es un escritor, que los que lo han leído, es muy prolífico en hablar sobre las justicias de América Latina. Pues gracias, y además ha hablado también de uno de los grandes pedagogos, sobre todo para la educación social, que estudiaremos más adelante, que es Paulo Freire. Muchas gracias. Y ahora daríamos paso a las preguntas, al debate. Tenemos unos minutos por todos aquellos, lo pueden hacer en castellano, también en inglés o bien en italiano. ¿Quién se atreve? Perfecto. Maricel.
Gracias, and thank you very much for this, great talk. When we were talking about education, and education is inevitable somehow, right? And I was wondering about social media. Have you looked into that? How social media, affects education and specifically related to immigration and all these ideas that we get from media and from our own politicians. Thank you very much.
Maybe we can collect more questions or I'll answer. Okay. It's not easy to answer for me. I strongly believe that social media are spaces, so we must live in these spaces, and the difference is the critical thoughts we use to live these spaces. So, for example, in Italy, in this moment, we have a huge debate about the artificial intelligence, because school does not face this issue. But I strongly believe that students should have the opportunity to build a critical use of artificial intelligence, like social media. We know that migration is continually covered from, and the language we use is very important because it's not politically neutral. Migration is always covered by words like invasion, security, and that's a form of miseducation, as Noam Chomsky says. So the only instrument we have to face this problem is critical thinking. And that's what education should always do. Thank you.
very difficult question. I talk with my students sometimes, and can you be a teacher if you are racist? How do you learn? How do you teach your students if you hate, if you don't want part of them?
Can you explain a little? I didn't catch. Sorry. Sorry. Can you explain? Can
Yes.
you repeat?
Puedes ser maestra, si no eres racista. ¿Cómo puedes enseñar a tus alumnos si no quieres o odias parte de ellos?
So, it's a very difficult question. Well, I'm sure that when we have a class, we have different opinions in this class. I will refer to the Italian school system, but I strongly believe that the values of the public school in Italy are highlighted by the Italian Constitution. The Italian Constitution in the Article 34 states that the school is open to everybody. Schools open to everybody means that the school must be reread as intercultural, and that's a constitutional value. So it doesn't matter what are your political opinions. If you are a teacher, you should be able to work with different, a multicultural school population. That's my opinion. Thank you. But it's not easy to answer, of course. Comments or comments? Feedbacks?
Vamos aquí, pues agradecemos al profesor Marco Catarci.
Thank you very much for your attention. Muchas gracias.